All right, Packer learners, here we go. Lots of videos today. This one is completely optional. So let me just make sure you're sure what we're working on. This is the 2 stories assignment that got introduced to you today. And what this video can help you with is part 2. It says Ghost Dance, Wounded Knee, 1890. I'm going to give you the information to use and to answer these questions. But if you'd rather read the textbook, you can go there. Or this short article is also super helpful if you'd rather read. This is for students that might be wanting a break because they know they're going to be reading on the 3rd section, or if this is just a good way for them to learn. So I'm going to talk about the Ghost Dance, Wounded Knee, 1890. I'm not going to give you specific answers to write down. This isn't a notes part of the document. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this event, and you should pause when you see or hear me talk about things that might answer one of these questions. So right now you might want to pause this video and read through these 5 questions to see what you should be listening for when I'm talking about this important event, or actually kind of 2 events mixed together. So we're going to start in a weird direction. I'm going to ask you about this guy, Carl Lentz. Now, most of you probably haven't heard about him, and that's okay, but he's, in some circles, a pretty famous guy. From this picture, you can't tell much other than he's got some big glasses and a lot of hair. When I throw this picture up, you might recognize these 2 guys as a very famous musician and a very famous basketball player. But if you don't know who they are, that's okay. Here's the same guy, Carl Lentz. Here we have Carl Lentz again with a pretty famous background. So some of you are starting to develop a theory on who he might be. And then I'll throw a wrench into your ideas by showing you this picture. Nuzzling up close to everybody's second favorite Canadian singer, the Beebs. And here we have the biggest takeaway of who Carl Lentz is. Carl Lentz happens to be a Christian pastor at a church in New York City. Now, we're not going to get into his religious beliefs at all, only to say that for some reason, his church in New York has attracted lots of famous people to it. And he is on a lot of group messages with a lot of famous people. Now, the reason I bring him up is he has found a way to make his brand of Christianity very attractive to a specific group of people. And the reason I bring Carl up is because this guy, Vovoka, is a Native American person who was alive in the 1800s, who did a very similar thing. He found a way to make a particular kind of religion very appealing to a specific group of people. And that's one of the things we want to explore in this section of the assignment. Now, a quick review using some maps. In the year 1500, and for many years after that, Native Americans controlled the entire map that you can see, with a few exceptions. Native Americans from sea to shining sea, there were hundreds of tribes and millions of Native Americans. By 1850, right before the Civil War, Native Americans still controlled virtually half of what is today the United States of America. After the Civil War, more and more Americans left this part of the country and started to move to other places. We've talked about Texas. California had a gold rush. There were more and more Americans moving into this land that previously had been held by Native Americans. We looked at, on the terms part of the sheet on that other video, we looked at this chunk of land from the Treaty of Fort Laramie, part of 5 states given to the Lakota. But by 1880, the land continues to shrink. And so more and more Americans are coming and taking this land that had been Native Americans' land, sometimes paying for it, oftentimes not. By 1887, this new law called the Dawes Act takes things even further. It says each Native American land would get just one small plot of land. I'm not suggesting just the land in this picture, but a small plot of land, no pickup truck. That was it. The tribes themselves would not control land anymore. And the government said that it would pay for the extra land that was sold, but spoiler alert, they didn't. So what we want to do is understand that Native Americans originally controlled all the land, and slowly but surely the land slipped from their grasp, mainly by the U.S. military taking control of certain areas and more settlers moving there. And the Dawes Act was, in some ways, the final step, not giving big chunks of land anymore to Native Americans, but just small little farms to individual families. So we have that reality. Native Americans in their lifetime, Native Americans that are alive in 1887, many of them can remember the time when they and their tribes controlled huge chunks of land, and they've seen it literally disappear in front of their eyes. With that, we have Vovoka, this amazing preacher who came on the scene. He was from a tribe that you maybe aren't familiar with in Nevada, Arizona, and California, called the Paiute tribe, and he kind of came up with a new brand of religion. He mixed traditional native religion with Christianity into a new kind of belief system, kind of like that other preacher, Carl Lentz, has taken Christianity and presented it in a way that's super appealing to very famous people. Some of the beliefs that he was really preaching were universal love everybody, that there was one God. You remember that term in 9th grade, right? For belief in one higher power. Monotheism, right? Right living, which meant living healthy, treating people respectfully, etc. And then here was the one that caught a lot of people's attention. He was preaching this idea that soon there would be a return to power for Native American tribes. That if Native Americans continued to do the right thing, that they would return to the time when the map looked a lot more powerful for Native Americans. Even back to this, perhaps. So he's preaching this idea of universal love, and in order to bring about this change, he brought this ghost dance, which was a form of worship, right? A way to pray that he said would or could help bring about this return to power for Native Americans. And it was hugely popular. Now, regardless of whether or not you believe in this idea, it was clear when we study the primary sources that this guy was very powerful, because Mormon travelers who were moving west onto native land, when they heard him preach, they wrote in their journals, wow, this guy is something special. Even though they didn't necessarily share his beliefs or his background, they were impressed with what he was saying. Many tribes sent delegations to learn and spread Vovoka's beliefs, including the Lakota from South Dakota, including Frank Wan's tribe. So they were all going to learn from him, much like famous people, including NBA basketball players and Canadian dancers, singers, are going to this guy's church in New York City today. So we have all these people going, and it essentially becomes a viral sensation, right? Even though it takes a lot longer than something going viral today, this is spreading around the country. And the U.S. Army is watching more and more Native Americans around the country do this ghost dance and say things like, we're coming back to power, we're going to take back our land. And it, quite frankly, scares them. And so here's a group of U.S. cavalry soldiers, and they are getting very nervous as they see this ghost dance spread literally across the country, like some sort of viral meme today, but obviously much more powerful. So the situation that we have here is the U.S. 7th Cavalry meets Chief C. Tatanka, who in U.S. or English language was referred to as Bigfoot. And they meet at this place near a creek called Wounded Knee. And so we talk about why the U.S. Army was concerned. C. Tatanka had traveled, here's his picture, with a group of men, women, and children, right? His group that he was in charge of. The U.S. Army was so scared by this group, roughly 300, again, not all warriors. It wasn't what they would call a war band or a war group. They weren't going out looking to fight. They were traveling with their whole community. But the U.S. Army still said, you need to give us all your weapons. And so most of C. Tatanka, most of Bigfoot's tribe did give up their guns. And even there's reports of giving up crowbars and knives. So it seemed like they were listening, or at least most people were listening to the U.S. Army's demand that they give up all their weapons. One older man did reveal that he still had a gun, and he said, if you're going to take my gun, you should pay me for it, or you should give me some fare. I'm not just going to give this up. Now, from that point on, historians have never been able to figure out exactly how it started. It's unclear who fired first, but what ultimately happened is someone fired a gun, and there was fighting, right? But the U.S. Army hunted down and killed in Sea Tatanka, Bigfoot's tribe, men, women, children. So they didn't just focus on the men who were warriors or fighters. They killed across the board members of Sea Tatanka or Bigfoot's group. And here is how Bigfoot or Sea Tatanka was left. He was shot. He was left frozen because it was in the winter, and there were many bodies that weren't buried. They were just left frozen in the snow for many days. And it was a shocking development that the U.S. Army, it wasn't the first time the U.S. Army had done this, but it was a devastating blow for Native Americans across the country. While you had this positive message from Vovoka, the ghost dance, being taught and believed and practiced, and then to have the U.S. Army kind of, you could argue, lose their temper or freak out a little bit and react to this group of 300 Lakota community members with such a devastating treatment and killing of so many people who did not seem to want to fight that day. And a lot of people see this as a real end of an era for the Native Americans because there was a lot less fighting between the Native Americans and the U.S. Army after this moment. So what you want to do with this information, and again, you can pause, rewind it, go back, look at it, is you want to look at these challenging questions that I laid out for you here in this section, labeled the Ghost Dance and Wounded Knee. So what treaty or law is important to this event? Which state did this take place in? Today we would call it a U.S. state. How did the United States show its sovereignty during this situation? That is, how did they show their power or their independence? And just kind of going through, putting down your best thought, your best information based on what I shared with you. And so I encourage you to go back through the video, rewatch parts of it. You can look here. You can see that Wounded Knee Creek is right in this area here in what is today South Dakota. And trying to find the information that will help you answer these questions. You'll continue on down to this next topic that took place a couple years ago, in 2016, 2017. And for that, you will have to read one of these 3 documents and answer the same set of questions. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you found this helpful. And again, do your best. Don't leave stuff blank. Put down a thought that you think might be right rather than leaving it blank. Because, of course, when I give this assignment to the koala bears, they leave it totally blank. So you want to do more work than the koala bears. Thanks.